Hello and welcome back to WebcastNews, and goodbye you. I'm your host as always, James Etheridge, and as I've hinted at the beginning, this video I'm going to be talking about the European Union referendum results in which the United Kingdom has voted to leave the EU. Voting ended last night and the votes were counted throughout the early hours of this morning, and early this morning it was announced that UK voted to leave, but it was a very close run thing. Leave received 51.9% of the votes, with Remain obviously then receiving 48.1% of the votes. And before I actually talk about what this means and everything else that happened, it was one of the biggest voting turnouts in the history for the United Kingdom. 33,551,983 votes were cast yesterday. You look at the population of the UK, which is around 63.2 million people. But then you exclude the 15 million people who are not actually old enough to vote, which then brings it down to 48.2. And then there's going to be a certain number of people ineligible to vote. So actually, this is a really high turnout, and it's still around 75% of the population actually voted. So then we look at how the votes went, and the United Kingdom was very split, with England and Wales voting to leave, and Scotland and Northern Ireland voting to remain. England had a 53.2 to 46.8% split. Wales even closer at 51.7 to 48.3%. Then going on to the Remain side, and Scotland were huge Remain backers with a 62% to 38% win for Remain in Scotland. Then Northern Ireland was fairly close with a 55.7% vote for Remain and a 44.3% vote for Leave. But with the majority of the UK's population being in England and most of England voting to leave, Leave just won. But something to throw out there, and this may actually not happen, but Scotland has already tried to gain independence from the United Kingdom once recently, and after this result where the majority of the UK has voted for Leave, but most of Scotland voted to Remain, do they try for another independence vote, and then if they gain that independence, try to apply to join the European Union again? Let me know what you think about that in the comment section down below, especially if you are from Scotland. And there's also an article which I will link in the description down below, where if you do live in the UK, you can put your postcode in and it will find how the votes went in your area, so which side won. In my area, Leave won. So what does this Leave vote mean? Well, it doesn't mean a lot straight away, but it has brought a big change immediately. And it was announced this morning, and David Cameron spoke outside of 10 Downing Street, announcing his resignation as Prime Minister. David Cameron was a strong backer of the Remain campaign, and in fact even set this referendum up himself because he believed that Remain would then win and that the UK could then make changes in their role with the EU to benefit them. Obviously, this has backfired hugely, with the UK then voting to actually leave. In his resignation speech, he thanked everyone that was on his side, especially the people in politics who put aside their party differences, which I think mainly meant Labour leader and the leader of the opposition, Jeremy Corbyn. However, his chances of becoming Prime Minister in the future have pretty much dwindled to nothing now. David Cameron then went on to say that there is no timetable for when he will actually leave his post as Prime Minister, but it will be around about October when the Conservative Party conference will take place. So David Cameron does remain until October, but most of that time will be taken up by recess. So what does this mean for the role of Prime Minister? Well, I highly doubt now that anyone who backed the Remain campaign has even the slightest chance to become Prime Minister in October. And you'd surely believe that it would be someone who backed the Leave campaign. And slightly worryingly, one Conservative member did, and that's the former Mayor of London, Boris Johnson. He was a very strong believer in the Leave campaign, along with Michael Gove as well. I don't know a lot about Michael Gove, so he almost seems like the better option just because I know less about him. The less you actually read into politics, the better the people look. The more you read into it, the more you hear about them, you just think, why are they important? And one of the things I've said about this now that we've voted to leave the EU is that Boris Johnson now has a good chance of becoming Prime Minister. And if Donald Trump becomes President of the United States, that's going to be an interesting room. Actually, is it just me, or I'm just visualising the two? Do Boris Johnson and Donald Trump kind of look alike slightly? That's just something that's randomly popped into my head, and I've just kind of said it. Now, one thing I am going to put out about this vote right now. The UK has not yet left the European Union. That may not happen for a few weeks, possibly months, even years. It's not, we voted leave, we have left. It's now, we have the opportunity to leave. Government can turn round and say no. David Cameron could have stayed in power and said we are not leaving. But he's not taken that option. But if we do leave the EU, let's have a look at what the Leave campaign's ideas are for how we will then improve as a country. One of their main points is they said that we would save £350 million, which would then go into things like the NHS, the health service in the UK, which sounds great, but then some business people got involved and checked out the figures. They found it was not £350 million, it's more like 160 to 170 million pounds. And that's because of rebates that the UK receives from the EU after they've given the £350 million to the European Union. 350 million is just what we give. It doesn't include what we then receive. But yes, 160, 170 million, that's still a nice amount to put into things. And then Nigel Farage was on Good Morning Britain this morning, and he said that they couldn't guarantee that this money would actually go into things like the NHS.
Which we will no longer send to the EU. Can you guarantee that's going to go to the NHS?
No, I can't, and I would never have made that claim. That was one of the mistakes I think that the Leave campaign made.
Despite this being literally the top thing on the Leave campaign. So we're already being lied to, and that was almost about 2 hours after Leave won. Nigel Farage, of course, being the UKIP leader, I've spoken about him before, a big part of the Leave campaign. But let's all remember, Nigel Farage is not even an MP. UKIP don't have a seat in Parliament. But moving on from that rant, then one of the other top points of the Leave campaign was immigration and the fact that we could actually control our own borders how we want to. Which, yes, is a good point. But do we then tail it to countries like Australia who have controlled immigration, where you put a certain number of immigrants that you will take in a year? Or do we try and do it another way? I'm in complete agreement with controlled immigration. The way it was going at the minute, the EU had no control over the refugees that were coming through from countries like Syria. Yes, they need new homes, but just walking into a country and expecting something doesn't really work like that. Do I feel bad for refugees? Obviously I do, because I would love for them to have a home somewhere, but it's difficult to see where. And then there is trading. Leaving the EU would allow the UK to openly trade with the world in any way they wanted to. But leave surely cuts our trade with other members of the European Union. And bearing in mind, one of the arguments for leaving the EU was that more countries are joining the European Union. Countries like Turkey and Albania are joining in the future, possibly. Their argument for that was leave before they join so that we don't get more people coming into the country on EU passports. But we've surely just cut trade links by leaving the EU. And I'm not backing the Remain campaign here. I, throughout this whole thing, have been pretty impartial to what happened. I've not really had a firm opinion on whether I prefer the Remain campaign or the Leave campaign. I have problems with both. But does the Leave campaign open up trade links with other countries outside of the European Union? I personally think it does, because we're now not having to adhere to European Union rules or how they want to trade. We can pick how we want to trade. But one major problem we've had with the UK voting to leave is the pound sterling. In the past day, in the past few hours, the pound sterling's value has absolutely plummeted. The price of the pound sterling's dropped around 10% compared to the dollar, and items in the UK are expected to get a lot more expensive. You will not get as much for what you have now. And my personal belief on this is that it's going to sort itself out. It's like stocks. They have a crash, everyone buys into it because they see that they can make a profit, price goes back up again, people sell it again, profit. And then how's the European Union coping with this? Well, after the results came out, they announced that they really want the UK out as quickly as possible so that they can sort out their own finances with the UK's money not coming into them. So that 160, 170 million pound mark that businessmen said we would then save is obviously not going to the EU, that's what they're losing. But central bankers within the EU and also central bankers from countries like Switzerland who aren't in the European Union, and then Japan as well, have said that they are willing to aid the EU in this process. So seemingly the EU isn't going to struggle too much. I'm just going to end this video and this news story by saying, again, UK has not left the EU yet. This vote was not automatic, it is now a process. It could take weeks, it could take months, it could potentially take years, depending on who then becomes Prime Minister after David Cameron and what they decide to do. There is the potential that the United Kingdom still stays in the European Union, and for now we are still part of the EU. But let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below. If you are from the UK, let me know what you voted and what you think of Leave winning. If you are from Europe, let me know what you think as well about this whole thing, especially if you are from an EU country. Do you think this will affect you in any way? And if you are from outside of Europe, outside of the EU, what is your whole take on this? And also, if you are from another EU country, do you believe that your country could potentially have a referendum in the future? And on that is it for this video. If you have liked it, make sure you hit the like button and also subscribe to the channel for more videos in the future. And as always, thanks for watching.